Brian. Brian, you ready? Can you
Hi,
tell us?
how's it
Thank
going?
you. Great. Well, all things considered, many thanks for joining us here today
Sure.
to talk about mental health. We're certainly excited that you both of you stepped up to share your perspectives. I know both of you are active in WhatsApp groups, and it's great to have expert point of view, right, and advice on how we can cope with all these different issues that we've been facing as a community in our homes now that we're here. Mostly, most of us who are here on the call here are going to stick around in the Bay Area and with our families at close quarters.
Yep. Well, I'm glad to be of help, and I hope the information that we talk about is useful and informative for everyone.
Great, perfect. Thank you. All right, just let me know, maybe if you could introduce yourself, that would be brilliant.
Yeah,
And
sure.
let me know when you want me to move the slides.
Sure, yeah. So I'm a clinical psychologist based in the LA area. I have a practice in Pasadena. My areas of specialty are working with younger clients, kids, and their families, as well as providing psychological assessment services. However, I also do provide psychotherapy for adults as well as couples, as well as parenting consultations. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I've trained in various different settings, from hospitals to community mental health clinics, and I'm now in my own private practice. So I've had the opportunity to work in a variety of different locations, settings with a variety of different populations as well.
Great. Well, great to meet you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Sure.
We also have Lily Lou. Lily, would you like to introduce yourself, please? Lily, you might still be on mute.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jasmine, for inviting both of us to speak at this unique community update and to address the community's concerns. And also thank you, Brian, for putting in a lot of effort in getting the slides together. Really appreciate that.
My pleasure.
So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in San Jose, California. I've been working in this field for several years. I was trained at the first screen addiction clinic in the Bay Area, and very appropriately so, because there are lots of high-tech companies where people are glued to the screen and they wonder if they have a screen addiction or not. So I've been working with a lot of people from high tech. And I was also trained in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And this is mostly for trauma. Given the pandemic, I see an increase in addiction and definitely in some form of trauma. I do work with a spectrum of different types of people, from teenagers to adults, and also couples and families on relationship issues, depression, anxiety, anger, trauma, and different types of addictions.
Got it. Well, thank you. That's good to know. Appreciate that introduction. Let's begin then. Sounds like we have we're excited that we have these experts in our community who could be able to speak to this. Brian, would you like to walk us through the deck prepared here?
Sure. Yeah. So, throughout some of the questions that we pulled and some of the responses that we've gotten, Lily and I have kind of carved out a few main areas of topics of discussion for us to cover. What we would really like to do is make this as dynamic of a discussion as possible. We don't really want to make this a formal presentation, but rather have this set up as kind of a discussion panel. So what we're going to do is kind of go through each topic one by one, and then open up to the floor to the community if there are any questions that come in, if there's specific things about that topic which you'd like for us to address. So the 5 areas that we put together are here on the slides. And how about we dive into the first one?
Sounds great.
Sure.
Let's push ahead.
Mm-hmm.
There we go.
So the first one is, well, the first area that we wanted to talk about is generally speaking, what might people be experiencing at this time? So needless to say, we are at an unprecedented time, which is presenting a huge stressor on communities, the likes of which many people have never experienced before. It's bringing true uncertainty, volatility, and an unpredictability. Day by day, we have changing statistics, we have positive information in one direction, and then in the other direction are confronted with really scary statistics. So it's truly a volatile time. And you know, that being said, it can really impact people in a variety of different ways. So one thing to think about is this idea of the diathesis stress model. So this model basically talks about how an individual's internal factors, these are things like predispositions for mental illness, genetic factors, personal traits. When you combine those internal stressors with, or internal factors with external factors, such as big stressors, just like this current situation, it can create greater susceptibility to mental health challenges and illnesses. And how that manifests, as I said, can take various different forms. These might include things like worsening physical complaints. A lot of time, psychological trauma and stress can be manifested in physical complaints. This might entail impaired cognitive or attentional problems, impaired sleep, or unpleasant, very vivid dreams. And you know, ultimately, it might make people feel like they're having to confront a completely different identity, with not being able to go to work the same way, not being able to go to the gym and other kind of routine activities. You know, not only are these things changing the external world, but for individuals, it's changing the way in which they see themselves, changing their own identity. Obviously, people are feeling isolated with the lockdowns in place right now, and they might even feel guilty for not being able to, you know, see parents, grandparents, family members who are older and would benefit from their help. And you know, given the long-term nature of this current stressor, what's happening is the sympathetic nervous system, which is part of the autonomic nervous system, is being chronically activated. And for those of you who might be aware of this term, the fight or flight response, that's essentially what the sympathetic nervous system takes care of, or what its main responsibility is. And it's great and essential and critical for us to use that in moments when we're faced with danger, right? That fight or flight response is part of our survival mechanism. But when it's chronically activated, there are a number of detrimental impacts that it imposes upon us. Now, number one on my list that I put together are an impaired immune function, and that's especially salient right now, given the nature of the crisis that we're all facing right now. Number two, increased stress hormones. That can be detrimental for cardiovascular health and is associated even with increased weight gains. Impaired digestion, impaired sexual functioning, and increased blood pressure, and impaired ability to rest and relax. So, you know, given the chronic activation of this response, it's essential that we have this discussion that we're having right now, talking about ways to manage it, ways to manage our stress, and ways to be aware of mental health and how that's playing out in, you know, the current situation. I'm going to hand it over to Lily. What are your thoughts on this? I wonder if there's specific things that some of your clients are sharing.
Yes, absolutely, Brian. The response that you talk about, that's really right on the money, so to speak. And you know, it's a response to fear. You know, basically, if you were to characterize the pandemic, there's a fear that, one might get ill and potentially die. There's the fear that, through the isolation, so this would be from a mental health perspective, that we're not in touch with, our beloved family members and other friends. And there's a third dimension to this characterization of the pandemic, and that's a financial consequence. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of fear towards the physical aspect or medical aspect of the pandemic, the isolation resulting in mental difficulties, as well as the financial side. So in working with my clients, some of them actually take it in stride and are able to function fairly well, and others are worried. Then there's a group of people who have not experienced mental health issues, and they find themselves being catapulted into that category of people who now become vulnerable because of the fear that triggers the autonomic nervous system. And then there's another group of people who are suffering from a major depression, and it's a pre-existing condition. And overlaying this pre-existing condition is this fear about the pandemic. So this is what we call the double depression. There's a very good article on New York Times that talks about how this pandemic leaves us alone, anxious, and depressed. It's a great article because it also talks about the importance, of how to keep yourself healthy. So more about it later as we go through the slides. So back to you, Brian.
Sure. Are there any questions, covering or on that topic of what people might be experiencing right now? If not,
looks like a really quiet crowd tonight. But maybe let me ask a question, just very fundamental one. What does autonomic nervous system mean? Seems like a very sort of clinical term here.
Yeah. So the autonomic nervous system comprises, is kind of the category in which the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system fall under. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, maybe let's just move on then. Brian?
Yeah, we can do that.
Super. Certainly feel that nervous system. So how do we cope with this?
Yeah, so in this slide, we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that, as well as how to address, coping with cabin fever. As I mentioned, we're being forced to isolate ourselves right now, obviously both in Singapore as well as here in California. But in the work that I'm doing with my clients, we're exploring the benefits and the essential the essential importance to feel like people are still going out into the world and doing their routines from remaining in their homes. So by doing that, what some of my clients and I have worked on are creating consistency in their schedule and their predictable daily routines, as much as they were able to when they were able to leave their homes and go into work and lead their lives as normal. What that means is setting a consistent time to wake up, setting regular meal times, getting up and dressing up as if you're going to go to work rather than staying in pajamas the whole day, which can feel very appealing to do. having a dedicated place to work from home, as well as going to bed at a regular time. At this time too, while we're being encouraged to socially distant from others, I think it's so important that individuals remain socially connected. So what that means is doing things like we're all doing tonight, connecting online using Zoom, FaceTime for younger clients that I work with. They share using House Party, trying to set up regular meetings. I work with some families, with a particular family who have started instituting a weekly dinner guest over for dinner at their home. So they set up the camera with their screen, and they invite somebody to have dinner with their family, which I think is a great idea to maintain, connected with others while we're, following the regulations and the advice from government and our leadership. So moving on to this idea of stress and how do we address that a little bit more targetedly in our home environment. A lot of times that stress can be triggered by the media, the 24-hour news cycles, which permeate multiple devices and have so many outlets. And again, the work with my clients that I've noticed doing is really being conscious and setting limits to those things. Whether it's saying, okay, I'm going to check my phone for half an hour in the morning. I want to be informed, but I want to make sure that I have distance from that triggering thing. Social media as well, similarly, unfortunately these days, we don't see cute animal videos as frequently as we do scary statistics. And that being said, maybe social media is another thing to limit and to allocate time throughout the day to check it, and then the rest of the day having distance from that. Another idea is trying to find habits to replace those behaviors, whether it be, okay, I find the need to check social media. What I'm going to do is reach out to a friend instead. I'll send them a text, or I'll even give them a call, something like that. That replacing behavior is so important in developing new habits. And another thing to consider, one of the most concrete ways to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the opposite of the fight or flight response, is through deep belly breathing. That means taking slow and deep breaths through your belly, not your chest. And there are other relaxation tools out there that can help complement that, whether that be Googling for mindfulness-based stress reduction techniques, or using apps such as the Calm app, which guides people through deep breathing. These are things that can help that and activate our relaxation. Maintaining good sleep hygiene, as I said, is also so important. There's a huge physiological benefit to having, a number of hours of long sleep, but also there's a huge psychological benefit to it too. It can really help us regulate our moods more effectively. Maintaining a good sleep hygiene also entails making the conditions around your sleep being optimal. That means creating a mental association with your bed for sleep. So not doing work on your laptop throughout the day, because your brain is not associating it only with sleep. Keeping your mobile phones and your devices away from your sleep, from your bed, to help improve your sleep is another idea to maintain good sleep hygiene. And another thing to think about too is, with all these stressors being compounded on us these days, a really useful idea to think about is to engage in a sense of self-compassion. And what that means is really thinking about the emotions that come up, and thinking about this idea, what the funk? So what that means is as these emotions come up, you think about what the function of these emotions are. What does it mean, that this anger that I'm feeling right now, where is it coming from? And that can really promote insight and awareness that can be a huge asset at this time. And then, the last idea I wanted to talk about too is we see so many viral videos and pictures of empty supermarket shelves and toilet paper and paper products being kept by stores because of this this idea of social contagion that's kind of running rampant. People buying what they see other people buying because of panic. And I think it's important to put a name to this type of behavior, and for people to think about this idea of what's more important, the thinker or the thought, right? Thinking about what is behind that type of behavior. And if you find yourself being compelled to do that, just being mindful of that can be really important. So yeah, those are just some of the things that I wanted to bring up. I wonder if there's things on your mind, Lily, that you're thinking of.
Yeah, so with cabin fever, most of the time it's the result of the social isolation and, being sheltered in place. So, back to the New York Times article, let me quote them. They said that this kind of social isolation is twice as harmful to a person's physical health as obesity. So given that, I really love the idea of having a schedule because it structures our lives, and it helps us, bring in relaxation, fun in an otherwise very confined home. So I agree that there are three legs to the scheduling that we should consider, and one leg is the sleep. Sleep is very important. Given that we're home, we may not have sufficient light to help regulate that sleep. And adults and kids, you might find yourself kind of staying up all night because, the circadian rhythm is impacted. So given that, a way to improve your sleep is actually through light therapy. And, we've got some really great devices these days with, like light therapy glasses, light boxes that can help regulate this circadian rhythm issue, which actually has a very close connection with anxiety and depression. So sleep is extremely, extremely important. And it also has a natural way of regulating the various neural transmitters. So anyhow, so that's one leg of the whole thing. The other one is exercise. And, I received a very good handout from my friends in Singapore, and it's called the Virtual Care Pack. In it are lots of links to, different ways of being able to do yoga and different types of exercise in your living room. So that's really very insightful. Coupled with exercise is really meditation. Meditation keeps you calm, keeps you relaxed, and it's extremely useful in this period of the pandemic. And the third leg, is to keep an eye on your nutrition. Make sure that you have a schedule for that. If you tend to be a night eater, this is a good time to change that. And try to eat as healthy as possible, because the alternative that I've seen in my clients is to have comfort food. And so that can lead to some, an eating disorder. So, it's really important for everybody to be aware of these three legs of keeping themselves healthy.
That's really good advice. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Lily. One other thing I've heard is that we need to bring awe back into our lives. Awe as in AWE, that whole notion of something to lift up our spirits, because right now there's a general sense of depression with all the negativity out there, that there might be even things that we find joy in around that could be amazing, such as a kid's new artwork, or something that's out there in terms of nature. The fact that the canals in Venice are now clean, since no one's polluting it. So there might be that silver lining that we need to start looking at as well. Have you guys?
Yes, I love that. That's from the Greater Good Science.
That is correct. The
right? Yeah, I love
right.
that website.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah.
I will say that the clearest skies I've ever seen in LA. So the silver lining.
Yeah, and the pandemic has really shifted, the need for all of us to, look at values and, to move away from goals, because the goal of, getting a promotion, the goal of, having a big get together, etc. Those are very tactical in time, and they have actually gone away with the pandemic, because there's no way we can do all those, right? And values, in terms of, being a good citizen, connecting with others, and just having this awe over nature, over little things that we have every day. That's very inspirational.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well,
Yeah.
Sorry, Brian, any comments there before we push ahead to the next topic?
I was going to ask, are there any questions coming up?
I think the questions we have are related to some of the upcoming topics that we could be discussing.
Yeah.
And we even have some folks sharing some other links as well. So great. Maybe let's move on to the next topic then. Parenting strategies.
Yeah. So this has been an area of interest from, the poll that we did, as well as the individual clients that I work with in my practice. So many of them are confronted with a completely different landscape for parenting. And, as a president, I think it's important to acknowledge that this change for adults is equally, if not more so, present for kids. I mean, their schools have been canceled, extracurricular activities are, have stopped. The idea of merely just going outside and playing is something completely different for a kid from what it once was, if they're even able to do that based on where they are. I know in Singapore that's not the case. So that is what we need to be going into this topic with, that those changes are distinct. Those kids are noticing these things. Kids are asking about these things. And therefore, it's crucial that parents do not outright avoid talking about this situation. If this is something a child is acknowledging and seeing going on around them, even if they are, don't have fully formed vocabulary and use of language, they are noticing the changes in routines. They're noticing mom and dad being around more often than usual. So that being said, for kids who are asking questions, or kids who do want to engage in a conversation about this, it's crucial for parents not to shy away. It's crucial for parents to talk to them about it. If they do not, that can implicitly communicate to a child that there is something they should be worried about, which is not the message we want to get across to them. So that being said, I'm encouraging parents to talk about it, being as developmentally appropriate as possible. So that means, not sharing information that will just fly over a kid's head or they won't understand. Talking about these things in a language that kids understand, whether that be using comics that are available online, describing what COVID-19 is, or videos showing why it's important to wash your hands for 20 seconds using soap. I've seen some great ones out there on that, or even explaining to a kid, these are the things you can do. There are a ton of resources out there online that's growing by the day that parents can pull from to help communicate that and use in a discussion with their kids. And a second point is it is essential for parents to go into those conversations, no matter how much worry and fear that they're experiencing on their individual level, to go into these conversations being cool, calm, and collected, taking a few deep breaths if need be, really getting in a good headspace to talk to their kids. Because if they are not, once again, you're implicitly getting a message across that this is something to be worried about, and that's something that we should not be doing, especially for kids who tend to be a little bit more anxious. So along those lines, because it's such a volatile and uncertain time that we live in, there might be questions kids ask their parents that they simply don't know the answer to. And that being said, it's okay for parents to say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that question right now, but I will look into it, and if I find out more, I will let you know. Sometimes parents feel like they should pretend that they should make up an answer, or they should, need to have the answer. But when you say, I don't know, but when I find out, I'll let you know, you're training your child to sit with ambiguity, which is a huge life skill, which can be used not only now, but in the future. It's a lesson that you're imparting to them. Once again, we've talked about the importance of maintaining a schedule for an individual adult, but maintaining a household schedule for kids, introducing predictability and structure in their daily routine is also something for children to manage their own anxiety, something that can also help parents not scramble for activities to help manage behaviors on a daily basis. Taking the time to go through the day, and something to start this process off with is using your child's school schedule. Having lunch during the times they usually have lunch, having breaks the same times they have breaks, trying to use that as a skeleton to build your own household schedule is a great idea. And along those lines, parents should really try and be a role model, demonstrating the importance to adhere to a schedule and a routine by doing that themselves and letting their children see that. Carving out dedicated workspaces at home, not just for adults, but kids as well, is going to be helpful, and has been helpful for a number of parents that I work with. And then, another thing I wanted to talk about is this idea of seeing this situation as an opportunity, using this time where parents have more time with their kids right now at home, and seeing that as an opportunity to think about and reflect on and to enhance their relationships with their kids in a way they may never have been able to before. So those are just a few ideas. Lily, have you had similar discussions with your clients?
Absolutely. So I like the idea of a schedule, because we do need to, make sure that we have work-life balance. So as parents, that's really important for you to show your kids that you are doing that, and also to help them put their lives together, because there's a lot of disruption. And there were a couple of questions from the survey concerning, kids on the spectrum. So kids on the spectrum would need, time to transition. And it's very important when you have that schedule to build into that, a way to help your kids transition. So in other words, that there needs to be some flexibility, to help your kids, even though you've got a schedule. So it's not carved in stone. There's also a question about home-based learning. And it's important to compute that into the schedule, and also to, find tutors who could help your kids with home-based learning as well. So having said that, inevitably parents and kids are going to get into issues, and during this pandemic, it can be quite stressful. So as parents, I would advise you to share your feelings. Sometimes you might get angry, sometimes you might be sad. When you are angry, I like what Brian said, calm down, breathe, try to walk away. And as you do those things, call them out too, so that your kids understand that you were getting angry and you were calming down, you're breathing, and you're walking away. And so they are going to imitate you, and they will do that when they, get frustrated.
Yep.
Right. So, that's very key.
Yeah. Lily, I had a question. I know that you work with teens a lot as well as their families, and I'm wondering if there are maybe some ideas about parenting strategies specifically targeted to parents of teenagers who are at home right now.
Right. I think with the schedule, you can kind of maintain a healthy life rather than let your teenager, who tends to be more oppositional and they want their space, to start kind of gravitating towards bad habits. In other words, waking up late, not doing their homework, playing video games, and doing a lot of binge watching. So, in a pandemic, while it's stressful, it doesn't mean that you need to just kind of let loose. In fact, with regard to screen addiction, it's on the rise among other kinds of addiction, alcohol as well. So, so it's important to discuss these things with your kids, and let them know what is the kind of the standard of healthy living with the use of video gaming and binge watching. The standard typically is 2 hours or fewer per day. So you might want to discuss that with your kids. There is a very a good website called screenagers.com, and it's hosted by Dr. Delaney in San Francisco, and she talks about all kinds of methods to provide structure and to provide a different way of spending time. So from a parental perspective, you could look into different things like the old-fashioned board games as an example, rather than a video game, etc. So, and if you don't know the answer to some of the questions, like Brian said, you can say you don't know, and that you are going to find an answer. And so one of the things that you might want to do is to be part of the Singapore Facebook group or the WhatsApp group, and ask those questions so that you can get back to your kids. So in other words, get some kind of a coach to help you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Looking at the questions online, we certainly had one question on autism and managing that. I find that it's often, I think explaining, as you mentioned, right, working with the child, but to ease them into the new situation, but then they seem to need a lot more time. Would you then suggest that the parents take turns to take care of the autistic child? I mean, what's the practical side of this?
From my perspective, the parents, do need to take the time with kids with autism. They need some time to, get into the groove. Um, and I'm a believer in positive parenting. So rather than looking at the child, demanding the time, look at the child trying to adapt, and spend 20 minutes with the child every night, or every evening in a very focused way, and letting the child lead the way, in sharing with you what they like to do. It could be a video game. It could be a book that they read. It could be a question that they have, or a toy that they find it to be interesting. So the parent, I would encourage the parent to just be like a sports commentator, observing the child, and just validating and having positive attachment to the child.
Mhm.
Mm.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep,
You know,
that-
Benjamin, Brian.
sorry, just to tag on to that. Yeah, I mean, that's in my parenting work. That's a huge factor, right?
Mhm.
And another thing on managing kids who are on the spectrum right now, this is an area that I have a personal investment in, as one of my older siblings is an adult who lives with autism, and describing this situation to him was very difficult, and he, it was difficult for him to make sense of things and to regulate himself at times. And for kids who may be on the spectrum, of course, every child is different, every human is different, but I can envision this being a challenging thing too. And as Lily was saying, some of the things that children on the spectrum find difficult are these transitions. But when there's a front-end work that goes into creating a predictable schedule that children on the spectrum can believe in and feel, rest assured that there is this predictability, that can be a game changer for parents who are living with kids on the spectrum right now. It really can help settle their nerves and have that predictability, and know that there are these delineated transitions throughout the day. And parents, of course, they'll have to do their work too, of saying, we only have 10 minutes left. We have 5 minutes left. We only have 2 minutes left, and then we're going to be doing this, right? But creating that schedule, especially for kids who are on the spectrum, is going to be key, I think.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. One of the things I've observed among some of my friends with younger kids is that they have to have, the kids are now also doing virtual online learning, the home-based learning thing. And they have classes with teachers, through Zoom. And they've always traditionally interacted with computers in a very fun way, as though it were a game and all that. And so they go to their computer system, they're getting ready for their virtual classroom, but they're not really in the mindset to learn. They're more in the mindset to play. So a friend of mine who actually teaches at Harker, first grade, said that she had prepared this entire amazing lesson on Egypt. And the kids, right, they're just, I guess, super bright and more familiar with tech than she was, started annotating all over her Zoom. And part of that also, I think, as parents, those of us who are working at home, who are used to Zooming, maybe I think one of the things that she was saying would be really helpful for her is if we actually, put the kids in the right frame of mind to learn and sort of set it up that way, so that it's time to focus, to be serious. It's not a game. It's you can certainly have fun while learning, no doubt about that, but to be respectful, right, of this interface and of the class that needs to happen. So I think parents might be too glad almost that online learning is actually happening, so they don't have to entertain the kid in between the sessions, but the kid just can't be left on their own, to do that, or at least they need to be supervised in the initial period. At least that was the kind of feedback I'm getting from teachers. Sure. Brian, any comments there?
Yeah, having a dedicated physical place, again, where mental associations are made, is going to be a really helpful thing for this particular issue. Some of my parents have told me, they said, I told my child, school's not out. School is now in the living room, or school is now in your bedroom, or in this desk in the house. and
Right.
creating that consistency in that this is the place where you're going to be working. These are the times where you're going to be expected to work. Drilling it in and making it as predictable and consistent as possible, I think are going to be assets for e-learning right now.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Brian. Thanks, Lily. Now let's perhaps move on so we can go back, right, to some of these other questions. I know all of you had a question on when people are going to need help. Let's maybe address that at the end of this as we push through some of these different sections, because I'm sure it'll come up. Romantic relationships. Now, Brian, take us through this.
Yeah, it would be so interesting to take a poll right now, asking people who, on this call, if their relationships are being strained, or at the very least, their relationship feels different right now. And I have a hunch that a lot of people are going to agree with me that their relationships feel very, very different. Some of you might have heard about these articles out there reporting surges of divorce rates in places that have curbed their lockdowns, in China. And it's true, relationships are taking a very, very different form. People are being forced to spend increased time with each other. And as we've spoken before, this increase of anxiety that individuals are experiencing, they very well might be taking that anxiety out on their partners at home. So to regulate this, I put together some ideas here. It's important to take some time for yourself, to be distant, and to allow your partner to do the same whenever they need it. I think it's important to focus on affirmations and expressing appreciation rather than criticism right now. It's a critical time for these things. That might entail thanking your partner for something they do consistently. And, it's become a habit, taking that time to thank and to acknowledge. It speaks volumes right now. Allowing your partner to express their emotion, their fear, their anger about this current situation, and using active listening strategies. And what that means is really focusing on what they're saying, taking it in and echoing back what you heard from your partner in your own words is going to be another tool for couples to use right now. And in doing that, we're encouraging this idea of being more curious than furious, right? Having an interest in learning where these emotions are coming from, rather than reacting in a volatile way to them, right? Being curious about these emotions is going to be key. However, arguments are going to come up. Challenges are going to be presented, and couples should keep in mind this idea of really kind of picking and choosing your battles, skipping the small stuff, being willing to put them behind you, and to really be conscious on what you think is something you're invested in fighting and making your point known on, and whether it's something to let go. Using this idea of parenting shifts has been really useful for the couples that I work with as well. When you need to, calling on your partner to take on a parenting shift because you need time or whatever it is you might need, and being willing to do that if your schedule or work allows, to maintain a sense of balance in your work life, which is, I'm sure, being strained right now for those of us who are working from home. Sticking to those hours throughout the day where you will not be working, and committing to those hours and making that as consistent, as regular, just as the other things we've talked about in the schedule. That's going to be something that's an asset for romantic partnership as well right now. And then, finally, the last thing that I wanted to share about this idea of being creative about creating dates at home, right? Trying to carve out those special moments, as much as possible, and setting the time aside for it during the week, I think are going to be an asset as well for couples.
That's great. Bringing some spice back into the relationship, perhaps. I can definitely vouch for the fact that things have been different between my husband and I,
Mm-hmm.
because he threw a towel at me the other day because I said he has to go to the grocery shop once a week instead of every other day because he loves to go to the grocery store. And I'm like, this is too dangerous to go. And yeah, and he, he likes to buy little things. So I think it's like getting the new habits and trusting each other. I think we're stressed because we care for each other and we're concerned, right? But at the same time, being able to communicate that is key.
Yeah.
What does the marriage counselor say, Lily?
Well, I think it's a great opportunity for couples to practice the couples dialogue, and just putting it on the screen. So essentially, it starts with I hear, I understand, and I empathize. So on the I hear side, essentially, you're just recapping, what your spouse is saying. So when you do that, you are attuning, with your spouse. It's part of what we call the attachment model. And it's very simple. If you don't go to the I understand or the I empathize part of the dialogue, it's okay. Because when you simply tell your husband, I hear you want to go to the grocery store every day or every other day, he would feel connected with you. He won't throw a towel at you then. So so just on that note, you would buy a lot of goodwill from your spouse. So as you go deeper, the I understand part is a deeper version of the dialogue. It connects you with the world of your spouse. So, he wants to go to the grocery store every other day. If you were in his shoes, you'd understand why. So if you deepen that conversation with him, he's going to connect with you. And if you could then go even further and say that, well, I feel, for you that you feel frustrated. Is that right? And he's going to say yes, right? So you deepen that conversation and the relationship is going to get better and also healthier. So just just an FYI on the dialogue that this can be very helpful to the couples on this call and others who might listen in.
I think you're on mute, Jasmine.
Thanks for letting me know, Brian. Yes, I was going to say, if you have any further questions, pop them into the chat window, but let's push ahead with the next topic. So thanks for the commentary there on couples, Brian, Lily. Let's talk a little bit more about financial uncertainty.
Yeah, so, there's no way to sugarcoat this situation. This is an extremely difficult financial time people are living in and people are facing in a very real way. However, the fact is that, the world has faced economic tumult before and it will again. And the fact is that the current situation is impacting people across the socioeconomic spectrum. However, how we choose to respond to this situation is crucial. So, my goal in this area of this, this topic is to help individuals assess how they are thinking about financial uncertainty that they're forced to sit with today. So while there might be an increased sense of anxiety and shifting beliefs about money, this idea of thinking about money, even right now, checking bank accounts and income statements and trading accounts, doing so can be a very triggering and anxiety provoking thing for people right now. But I think it's going to be helpful ultimately to sit and think about these thoughts, as uncomfortable as they may be. So, in my clinical work and in my personal experience with friends and family, I've noticed that a lot of people on this particular topic have the tendency to engage in what's called catastrophic thinking. So this means ruminating about worst case scenarios, which are the extremely worst outcome that we could think of, and may even be irrational at times. So I think it's helpful for people to start identifying those thoughts when they come up, but also starting to challenge them when they come up. So there are a couple exercises that I think might be useful. So one of them is called the worst case exercise. And before I start, I do want to reiterate that yes, it is uncomfortable to think about these things. And I hope that obviously that things don't get to that point for individuals out there. However, it can be helpful to think about these things. For instance, so in the worst case scenario, let's say, for example, that you won't be able to earn the same amount of money as you did last month. What would that mean? And taking the time to kind of think those thoughts through. Okay, so let's say maybe it means I won't be able to pay my rent. Okay, well then what? So then maybe that would mean I would have to find a different place to stay, whether it be with friends, with family. Okay, so once you sit with that for a little bit, okay, what would you do next? Okay, maybe that means I will have to apply for unemployment or other ways of getting financial support from people around me or institutions around me. And by following that exercise, what individuals tend to realize is that these catastrophizing thoughts, these overwhelming thoughts, which can sometimes be totally irrational and taken out of perspective, that those thoughts are in fact not world-ending, that they can be worked around despite being an uncomfortable thing to do, but there is a resolution, right? And then another thing to think about too is this idea of picturing yourself a year from now and looking back at yourself right now. And, to kind of put it in Singlish, we're finding ourselves in a place where we cannot affect change in the grand scheme of socioeconomic models. So in a lot of ways, people are forced to kind of sit and suck thumb, right? So that being said, it can be very empowering for people to think about what are ways where I can affect change? What are ways for me to actually think about changing aspects of myself that will be useful? For instance, how would I have liked to handle this situation? How do I wish I would have grown? What would I want to accomplish? What are other life roles or interests that I had that I would like to explore outside of work, outside of the economic challenges that we're facing? And it's this idea of investing in other areas of themselves and realizing that there are these other areas which may have been neglected or maybe not looked at when we were focusing so much on work when we had the opportunity to. So those are just some ideas to think of, but I do want to acknowledge it and don't want to minimize that. Yes, it is undoubtedly a difficult time financially for a lot of people out there.
Great point. Thanks, Brian. Lily, any thoughts on that?
Yes, it is a very difficult situation, and I kind of want to share with everybody a book that I find very useful, especially in times like this. It's a book by Viktor Frankl, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning. And for those who have read his book, you probably know that the backdrop of his book is about his Nazi encampment in the death camp. And so he was wondering, how he could survive. So he came up with a couple of takeaways. The first one is, if you can change your environment to make it better, then do that. If you're not able to change the environment, like how the pandemic is with the terrible financial losses, then you'd have to change your attitude. And as a result of what he did, he came up with logotherapy, which is a therapy based on existentialism, which is kind of what we're going through right now. So hopefully that can help everybody feel that you are empowered to change how you look at things, and you can choose a healthier way to look at things.
Great point, really.
Would it perhaps help to speak with a professional, a financial planner, for example, just to run through the numbers as well, just as, you know, when we find issues with mental health, maybe to approach Brian or Lily, but then in this case, when we talk about financial uncertainty, just to understand options with someone who is a professional in this space? Or would it create more anxiety, you think?
I mean, it's kind of a tough question to answer. I mean, you know, it really is an individual question that deserves an individualized answer. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, while there are professionals out there that can help address these things, as you said, I certainly am not one of those, but there are supports out there that might be helpful. And you know, the other thing too is there are these other ideas that come along with thinking about finances and financial uncertainty and uncertainty in general that might be useful in terms of hashing out with a mental health professional, which is in my and Lily's purview. So.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Brian. You know, I think just shifting a little bit back to, and now that we've seen all these different topics, and many thanks to both you and Lily for addressing them. There was a question earlier from Oliver. How do we know when we actually need help? I mean, we're all feeling some elevated stress, elevated concern, but when do we start realizing that we actually reach a point where we need professional help? Brian, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Lily, would you like to answer the question? Or?
Yes, I actually responded to the chat that, you know, when a person suddenly, you know, or, you know, over the last few weeks started to have a change in their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So that's the triad, you know, of kind of how you assess whether it's a complex situation that needs professional help or not. So if there's a major shift in the thoughts, not so much like, you know, this is a difficult situation. It is a difficult situation. But if the thought is more along the lines of, you know, it's hopeless, you know, this cannot be fixed, you know, the catastrophic thinking that Brian refers to, this is an issue, and it can be shown in terms of the emotional side, that the person might get angry more easily or cries a little bit more, and, you know, have behaviors that are not in keeping with who the person typically is. You know, for instance, you know, doing a lot of video gaming, or eating a lot of food, or yelling or throwing things, or just, you know, keeping away from people within the same family. So when you see all of those or some of those, and I would encourage parents to be direct and partners to be direct with each other and ask them, you know, how are you feeling? And if they say, you know, I'm really feeling bad, you know, I'm having suicidal thoughts, do get help.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, to kind of take a slightly different route to answering that question too is, you know, as I mentioned earlier, the field that Lily and I work in is such an individualized, individually oriented field. So that being said, you know, for one person there might be a concrete reason or point at which they say, okay, at this point I'm going to reach out for help. For another person, it could mean something completely different. However, you know, I think it's important to take into consideration that working with a mental health professional, it doesn't mean that you are, you know, suffering from a debilitating mental illness, or that you are disabled in any way. You know, of course, if you're facing serious mental illness, you very well might be facing some real disabilities. However, you know, that working with a mental health professional could be every other week. It could be a one-off meeting. It could be a consultation to talk and just kind of have a sounding board for some of these things. So, you know, taking a different route to Lily's answer, it might mean having a conversation and seeing where it goes and seeing if it's something useful and seeing if there's any benefit that comes to it. And there are many mental health professionals that, including myself, that approach work from that way. So there could be a range of answers for that question, but hopefully that kind of just has people thinking about these different routes to help.
That's awesome, Brian. I mean, I think there is sometimes a social stigma in talking to a shrink or a mental health professional. And it's great that you guys are on the call here because we can see how pervasive these issues are and that they are things that we all face, and that if we do need help or counseling, that, you know, we can reach out to folks like you. And now that we've interacted with you, hopefully we'll feel more comfortable as well to broach some of those topics. So thank you very much for joining our session today, both of you, Brian and Lily. I know you're both contactable as well, you know, online. And please pop your email addresses into the Zoom chat, which you have done before, and which are also in the deck in the introductory portion. So if anybody needs to find you guys, I'm sure they'll reach out to you directly or via us. So super glad actually to have this direct interaction, as I mentioned. Thank you. One of the things that we thought was interesting as well in the line of some of the conversations we had was this article that Karen Tay wrote, and it almost feels like I want to say our very own Karen Tay, you know, shared some perspectives in Singapore's Today magazine on dealing with 4 challenges of telecommuting and how to keep teams well and effective, and includes as well some insights on balancing the sort of professional personal space. Karen, would you like to kind of talk us through this article a little bit? Because it's super interesting. I'm going to pop the link in there, and maybe while I do that, if you could kind of give us a brief on what you covered in your super useful article.
Great. Hi, everyone. I don't want to keep you guys too long. I'll just give you a short summary. I think I've been working remotely for 3 years, and actually it's very hard psychologically. And I list out 4 challenges for us to watch out for. The first one is really providing psychological safety for your teams. So if you're running a team, how do you do that? With gratitude, with even expressing emotions over email, with better forms of feedback rather than assuming people are, you know, slacking off. I think that's a worry, right? Especially for many Asian cultures. The second challenge is, you know, blur work-life boundaries. So I really resonate with what Brian and Lily share about having good structures, right? Having predictable structures as far as you can, kind of routinize your weeks and say these meetings are always on the same day every time. Minimize things that are like last minute and that make you have stress or make you think that you have to keep working, because I think the temptation is to never stop working when you're remote. So I put some tips in there on how I do it and a schedule for how my husband and I actually structure our weeks into 2 to 3 hour blocks so that we actually know who's doing what, who can work when, and then we trade off based on that. You know, the third one is on how to encourage more organic collaboration when virtual, because everything just falls into silos when you're virtual. That's just the normal train of reaction. And finally, the last one is the challenge of social life. How do you really bring that social life, that mutual care into the virtual world? So I just popped the article in there, and I hope that's useful for you because I've been learning all of those the hard way in the last 3 years.
Brilliant. Thank you. I really enjoyed reading it. A lot of it commiserated with totally what we're going through now as a team, right? At work and all that, and juggling that professional personal zone. And very much gelled with what Brian and Lee were advising us on to. So the article link is attached here in our Zoom chat, and super proud that you were able to share these perspectives. And thanks for being on the call today too, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let me just do a quick round. I know we're at the end of our call now with all the key panelists. I don't know if Daryl's still on. Daryl, any parting words? Concluding from our earlier segment, right, from some of the official notes and updates from Singapore before we part. The Singapore Global Network, David's been really active online, but we haven't heard from you yet. David, any parting thoughts?
Hi, Jasmine. So just wanted to thank Jasmine, Karen, Daryl, and Mark for organizing this every week. For for everyone's information, this is really, really not easy. I mean, what Brian and what Lily mentioned about having to juggle with family and juggle with work, they have to juggle with this community effort as well. And I think whenever we talk to them every week to prepare for these sessions, they always say that the reason why they're doing it is because they find that it's helpful for the community. So this is entirely volunteer driven. So we really, really hope that for those of you out there who are interested to help out, so there were a few that stepped up, Rachel and Jennifer who stepped up to say they were interested to help out. And Brian as well came forward to proactively say that he wanted to contribute because of his skill sets. So we have, because of all these efforts, people coming together, we have this exciting forums every week. And actually next week we have someone exciting coming along to share about COVID-19 as well. So I hope that there's two things out of this. So number one, if you're interested to volunteer, to contribute somehow, whether it's a speaker or whether it's to, in terms of administrative, to help out with the slides, the slides or other aspects of the work, feel free to reach out to me, reach out to Karen, Jasmine or Mark. And number two, I mean, at the end of this, really, really hope we have a meeting and thank them for all the hard work they put into this. Yeah, that's it from me.
Well, great. Thank you, David. And we are, from Singapore Connect, super grateful that we have all of you guys here as well from, the official government side, MFA, Singapore Global Connect, to network to really sort of provide that, that information we need, right, to the community here. So thank you for that. Karen, any thoughts before we pass them on to Brian and Lily?
No, I'm all good. Thanks.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing your story and your article. Keep writing. We're so proud of you. Brian, any parting words?
No, I just wanted to encourage people, if they would like to get in touch with me, if they have any other questions or comments, or would like to connect for any other reason, feel free to shoot me an email and I'd be happy to connect.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Lily?
Yep.
Likewise, I'm very grateful to be part of this panel with Brian, and it's great to be connected with people from Singapore. So if you have any questions or if you have any thoughts, I'm very open to what you have to say and love to be connected with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much for your time and attention this evening, for all your contributions. And as we sign off, be well, and by all means, keep your distance. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you.
I'm going to keep the chat room window open for a little bit more, just so that, if there are any questions that are coming through, feel free to pop them. But we're going to be shutting down the session. Again, once again, thank you all for your active participation. Super great questions.